In the village of Olu, Amara's salon didn't belong. It sat under a dead baobab tree, reeking of burnt things and old, stagnant air. It wasn't just a shop. It felt like a biological entity, breathing slowly in the heat. The locals avoided walking too close, sensing a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. The air around the hut was unnaturally cold, clinging to the skin like a wet breath. Yet, women came. Drawn by whispers of impossible beauty, they walked right into the mouth of the beast, ignoring the gut feeling that screamed, "Run!" They entered seeking glamour, unaware they were stepping into a trap set by something ancient. Amara's skin looked like dry clay, her one good eye piercing, the other a dead, milky moon. Her hands moved too fast, blurring with an inhuman, insect-like speed. She didn't just braid hair. She seemed to be performing surgery on fate itself. But the luck she wove felt borrowed, stolen. When she touched a head, it wasn't a service. It felt like a transaction with something lurking beneath the floorboards. Her power was undeniable, but it felt wrong, like a gift from a bad spirit. She wove destiny, yes, but at what cost? No one asked, too afraid of the answer.
The women waiting outside weren't chatting happily. They were buzzing like infected flies. They clutched their payments, eyes darting, desperate and anxious. "The chief's daughter," one whispered, trembling. "Her hair, it moves when there is no wind." They nodded, eyes wide, hooked on the promise of power, ignoring the ominous weight in the air. They were addicts, lining up for their fix of beauty, willing to overlook the creeping dread that surrounded the hut. They sat on their stools, sweating, not from heat, but from a collective, silent fear of what was waiting inside. The rule above the door wasn't advice, it was a threat, etched in charcoal. No mirrors. No reflections allowed. No glass, no water, nothing. Why hide the process? Why the extreme secrecy? It felt like a cover-up. The women obeyed, terrified of being banned, but more terrified of what they might see if they looked too closely before the work was done. The absence of mirrors suggested that the reflection might show something the eyes weren't meant to handle. It was a law of containment, keeping the truth hidden in the dark where it belonged. Ineka arrived like she owned the sunlight, but the shadows seemed to reach for her. She was beautiful, arrogant, and completely oblivious to the snare she was walking into. She carried a large bag, clutching it too tightly against her chest. She didn't greet the others. She just marched toward the dark doorway, a moth flying straight into a bug zapper. Her confidence was blinding, masking the danger. She thought she was the predator here, the queen bee, but in the shadow of the baobab, she was nothing but unsuspecting prey. Ineka wanted the crown of glory. She wanted to be a legend, but as she stood at the threshold, the smell of the hut hit her. Musk, decay, and something metallic, like old blood masked by incense. She hesitated. A primal instinct warned her that this wasn't a salon, but a slaughterhouse for vanity. But her ego was louder than her survival instinct. She pushed the door open, sealing her fate, driven by a desperate need to be worshipped, unaware that the price of worship in this hut was higher than gold. The sunlight hit the room like a violation. The shadows in the corners seemed to physically recoil. Amara didn't blink. She just stopped, her fingers freezing on a customer's scalp. The silence was absolute. Nika stood there, loud and bright, unaware that she had just interrupted a ritual, not a hairstyle. The air grew heavy, pressing against their eardrums. It felt less like an awkward pause and more like the holding of breath before a strike. The other women shrank back, sensing the shift in the atmosphere from quiet menace to active danger. "I want the crown," Nika demanded. Amara turned slowly, Her dead eye seemed to see more than the living one. "It requires the spirit weave," Amara whispered, her voice like grinding stones. "It is heavy." Nika laughed, dismissing the warning. She didn't see the way Amara's shadow seemed to detach from her feet and ripple across the floor. "I can handle it," Nika lied, her arrogance blinding her to the supernatural red flags waving in her face. Amara stared, her expression unreadable, calculating the cost Nika was about to pay. The timid customer fled, sensing the predator in the room. Nika sat in the warm chair. It felt sticky. The women in the corner watched, huddled together like survivors of a wreck. "It draws from the shadows," one warned, voice shaking. "Don't do it." Nika scoffed, reaching into her bag where the silver mirror lay hidden. "Just braid, old woman," she commanded. She was inviting the devil in, opening the door wide, thinking she could control the darkness. The chorus watched, paralyzed by the inevitability of the crash. Amara raised her hands to the darkest corners of the ceiling. She began to hum, a sound that made teeth ache. The light died. The room wasn't just dark, it was absent of light. Neneka felt a cold touch on her neck. Not hands. Something else. Something wet. "Sit still," Amara hissed, her voice sounding like it came from everywhere at once. "The eyes lie. Trust the dark." The atmosphere shifted from a salon to a tomb. Neneka shivered, the cold seeping into her bones. The world outside vanished. No birds, no wind. Just the wet swish-snap of the braiding. It sounded like bones breaking underwater. Neneka couldn't see anything. She felt the weight piling onto her head, cold and heavy. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb against her skull. "It feels alive," she whispered, fear finally leaking into her voice. Amara didn't answer, just kept weaving, her breath rattling in her chest. The isolation was complete. Neneka was alone in the void with whatever was being attached to her head. Amara wasn't using hair. She was pulling shadows from the cracks in the walls. Living, breathing darkness. Things that hated the light. They were shy, parasitic entities that Amara wrestled into knots. She was binding monsters to Neneka's head, singing them to sleep so they would play the role of beauty. Neneka thought she was getting extensions. She was actually becoming a host. The shadows writhed in Amara's grip, reluctant, but forced into shape, a crown of dormant nightmares waiting for a trigger to wake up. Hours passed in the suffocating dark. Neneka's neck screamed under the weight. The smell was overwhelming now, wet earth and ozone. She felt watched, not by Amara, but by the things on her head. "Are we done?" she asked, voice thin. "The structure must set," Amara replied, her voice sounding too far away, detached. Neneka's boredom was turning into panic. The sensory deprivation was stripping away her defenses, leaving her raw and exposed to the creeping suspicion that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The itch started. It wasn't skin deep. It felt like it was under the scalp. "It's moving," Neneka gasped. "It is settling," Amara lied, her hands clamping down hard. The shadows were waking up, agitated by Neneka's fear. They didn't like the host. Amara worked frantically, trying to trap them before they realized where they were. The hair rippled, a movement that defied physics. Neneka clawed at her thigh to stop herself from screaming. The thing on her head was restless. The women whispered, "It's twitching. Look at it." The darkness above Neneka's head shifted on its own, independent of her movements. Neneka heard them and thought it was awe. Her vanity was a drug, blinding her to the horror. She needed to see. The urge to look, to validate her own existence was overpowering. The trap was set. The chorus wasn't admiring a queen. They were watching a sacrifice being prepared, morbid curiosity keeping them glued to their seats. "Finished," Amara breathed, stepping back. The tower of blackness stood tall, vibrating with a low hum. "Do not look until nightfall," she warned, wiping strange slime from her hands. "The sun will break the bind." Neka stood, swaying under the alien mass. She tossed gold on the table, her hand drifting to her bag. She felt powerful, but she looked like a puppet carrying a master. The atmosphere was brittle, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. "You look like a spirit," a woman gasped. That was it. Neka couldn't wait. The validation wasn't enough. She needed the visual. She touched the cold metal of the mirror in her bag. Just one peek. The shadows on her head tightened, sensing the intent. The air in the hut grew instantly colder, dropping to freezing. Neka's smile was wicked, secretive. She thought she was breaking a rule. She didn't know she was breaking a seal. "Neka, no!" The scream came too late. Neka whipped the mirror out. The flash of silver cut through the gloom like a knife. Amara roared, a sound that wasn't human. But Neka looked. She looked right into the glass, and the glass showed her what was really sitting on her skull. The reflection stripped away the magic, revealing the naked, ugly truth. The silence of the hut shattered into a million pieces. No braids, just legs. Spindly, black legs. Thousands of them. Writhing, oily shapes masquerading as hair. In the mirror, the glamour failed. The monsters saw themselves. They saw their own hideousness reflected back. And they panicked. It wasn't hair. It was a colony. A swarm of void creatures woven together, now fully awake and terrified of their own image. Neka stared, her mind unable to process the horror of the squirming mass attached to her skin. Hiss! The sound tore through the hut. The hair shrieked. The shadows realized they were exposed. They weren't just hair, they were a hive, and the hive was angry. The women screamed as the mass on Neka's head exploded into frantic motion, lashing out. The sound was wet and clicking, the sound of 1,000 insects swarming. The deception was over. The violence began. "Get it off!" Neka clawed at her head, but her hands passed through smoke. The shadows grabbed back. They pulled. Hard. Desperate to escape the reflection, they uprooted themselves. Neka felt her scalp tearing. They weren't just attached, they had fused. The pain was absolute, a physical separation of spirit and flesh. Neka thrashed, but the entity was stronger. It wanted to go home, back to the dark, and it didn't care what it had to break to get there. Rip. The shadows tore free, taking Neneka's real hair with them in a violent, bloody spray. They swirled like a black tornado, screeching, before diving back into the cracks of the hut. Neneka collapsed, the mirror shattered, the gold scattered in the dust. The room fell silent, save for the wet sobbing of the girl on the floor. The entity was gone, leaving only wreckage behind. Neneka lowered her hands. She was bald, raw, plucked clean. The vanity had cost her everything. She stared at the broken glass, seeing the ruin of her face. She screamed, a sound of pure, broken ego, and ran into the blinding sun, a warning to everyone. The beauty was gone, stripped away to reveal the bloody consequence of looking too closely at magic.
Amara swept the glass. She didn't care. Magic isn't a toy, she muttered, kicking the shards aside. She looked at the terrified line of women. Who's next? The scary part? One of them stood up. The addiction to beauty was stronger than the fear of the monster. They watched Neneka run, saw the blood, and still they sat down in the chair. That was the true horror. Neneka vanished. When she returned, she was gray and broken. But the salon remains. The line is longer. The women look like queens, but their eyes are dead. They don't ask about the dark. They don't bring mirrors. They know now. Beauty is a parasite, and you have to let it feed. If you want the crown, you have to trust
The monster.